play has an important implication for physical, psychological, and psychosocial development of any children. Thus, play is appropriate medium utilized with children. Play therapy capitalizes on such therapeutic powers of play or changing mechanisms within play and consider its strategic use through trained professionals within therapeutic context to promote specific therapeutic outcome. Today, we have with us one such trained professional who uses play as a medium for children to express themselves and process their thoughts, feelings, and experiences, Ms. Anya Reddy. Ms. Anya Reddy is a passionate play therapist who is born and brought up in Chennai, India. She has been certified by Leeds Beckett University, England, and registered at Play Therapy International in the UK. She is a writer and blogger, has written many articles in newspapers and blogs. She has been the resource person for many webinars and school programs to discuss about play therapy. I welcome you, Ms. Anya, and invite you to address the participants. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here today. So without further ado, shall I begin our presentation?
Yes, please.
Okay. Please bear with me while I just figure out the technicalities. So today we're going to be talking about play therapy, and I'm just going to go over a few of the points we're going to cover today. I'll introduce myself. I'll talk about why I'm here today. I'm going to play a video that illustrates play therapy beautifully. I'll explain how play therapy is different from play, who play therapy can benefit. I'll talk about the founder of play therapy and her theory. I'll talk about the toolkit that we use in play therapy, whether it's got any science backing it. I'll go over a poem, and then I'll share a few references. So as ma'am has already mentioned, I'm very passionate about play therapy. I'm not yet a play therapist. That requires a lot more experience. You could call me a therapeutic play specialist, perhaps. So I've worked at a couple of clinics, and what drove me to play therapy was I really wanted to work with children and children's trauma. I think growing up, I saw a lot of issues that I felt could be better dealt with if we grew up in a more emotionally literate community. And by community, I mean family communities, school communities, and also just the communities within our cities, the manner in which we address children, and also where parents are coming from, and not just parents, I mean adults in general. Where are adults coming from when they address children? There's a lot of, I would say, misguided ideas behind respect, discipline, education, and I believe that by addressing people's emotional intellect, we can change a lot of things on a much deeper, and also play therapy adopts a lot of creative methods, and I'll go into that later, but I didn't want to sit and talk to children. I don't feel like I don't think that's fun. I don't think it's going to work with children. And I also believe that our unconscious explores and expresses itself using creative techniques. So whether it's dreams or art or play or movement, there are so many different ways in which we express ourselves and experience ourselves and the world around us in more ways than with words. Okay, is play therapy important? I meet a lot of people, who say things like I think therapy is too much for children. I don't think children can handle therapy. But do children really need therapy? Oh, but also you just play with children. Things like, oh, but what could a child need therapy for? And I want to address this. I'm sure all of you, there's no mental health stigma in this room, but it's something that I want to discuss anyway, because a child is a human being, first and foremost. Your age does not change the fact that you are born with the ability to emote. Your body and mind are responding. And it's on some level, honestly, I don't know how else to explain. Why would a child need therapy? It's the same way that an adult needs therapy. That's just how I explain it. And there are just so many instances, whether it's bullying or abuse or neglect or isolation or, you know, frequent change of cities, a lack of friends, sibling abuse, divorce. There are just umpteen reasons for a child to need therapy. That in, in space. Most of our Indian education systems, and I mean formal and informal education, most of them forget to teach us how to introspect, how to reflect, how to access our emotions and express things in an approach. So can you really blame a child who has seen his parents fight, you know, and he ends up learning that the only way to express his difficult emotions is to shout. It's what he has seen. It is most likely what he has also experienced. And a lot of times children don't end up coming to therapy. They end up growing up and carrying these issues and then similar issues, and then it's much harder when you're an adult to heal the inner child. So on that note, I also want to mention this quote on the right side: a healer does not heal you. A healer is someone who holds space for you while you awaken your inner healer so that you may heal yourself. By a lady named Mariam Hasna. And I meet a lot of people and I tell them my job as a play therapist or, well, whatever, play therapy expert is to help a child help themselves. My goal is never to keep a client for too long. I do a minimum of 12 sessions a week, a month, minimum. And the idea is if I ever have a client that's holding on to me for far too long, I'm going to wonder if I'm really helping that client. If the therapy is effective, because my goal is to help the client help themselves. I am like someone that I want the client to wean themselves off of. Also, I just want to mention, if at any point you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt me. That's no problem at all. So up until now, are there any questions? Okay, going forward. So this is a beautiful quote by Leonard Cohen. He's a singer, poet, and he said, "Children don't say, 'I had a hard day.' Children, can we talk? They say, 'Will you play with me?'" And if I think this is just to you about something that happened. It's very rare for a child to say that. And it's probably going to be an older child, maybe in the early teens or the teens. But the younger children, often, in order to really understand how they're feeling, to understand their world, to build. I'm sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback. Hello?
Yes, Anya, we can hear you. I think there is
Okay,
some network disturbance at your end.
okay, this is a bit painful. Okay, so we'll move on. Okay, this is a video. It's by Association for Play Therapy.
As a way of coping with my embarrassment, I became angry. I'm ashamed to admit it, dear mother, but I could not resist striking Tommy with my fist. While this act of emotional release did offer a moment's respite from my embarrassment, victory was short-lived. The next thing I knew, Tommy had mobilized me with a headlock and gave me what is referred to colloquially as a swirl.
This isn't how kids communicate, but they do communicate in other ways. Play is a child's first language. When a child plays, they express thoughts and feelings that would otherwise remain hidden. That's why play therapy can be a powerful tool for addressing a child's cognitive, behavioral, and emotional challenges. Licensed mental health practitioners use play therapy to help children process their experiences and develop more effective strategies for managing the world. To learn more about play therapy and registered play therapists, visit a4pt.org.
I really just need a chocolate milk on the rocks and a long soak in the
This video never fails to make me smile. So it just going back to the previous quote, children don't say, I had a hard day, can we talk? They say, will you play with me? And I think that video explained this quote beautifully. The idea is that, okay, I'll give you an example. If you watch a child, and most children, they love playing teacher-student. So typically the child wants to be the teacher first. And you'll see usually what I've seen is children play out a strict teacher, a punishing teacher, maybe even a mean teacher. And they expect you to cover and, show remorse and say sorry and make yourself small. And then all of a sudden the child changes, the teacher changes, and the teacher becomes a forgiving teacher, a kind teacher. And this is a beautiful example because it shows us what the child has learned from their environment. The child usually plays out their experiences. So the child is playing out a mean teacher that the child has met, a punishing teacher. And when you are playing a sorry, apologetic child, it's because that's whom the child has been. So this role play, the child is inhabiting the mean teacher that he or she has met. And in inhabiting that sort of role, the child is able to gain power, is able to regain rather the power that they felt that they lost when they had to be the child that they have projected onto you. So when you play and this sorry, energetic child, they are projecting their experience onto you. They are how it felt. They are reliving it through you. So they are watching how it felt. They are watching how it felt for them. And they are also watching themselves with the teacher's eyes. And it gives them a chance to see how they could have experienced it differently, how the teacher could have been kinder. So once in the teacher's shoes, once in the child's shoes, once back in their own shoes, they're now playing a kinder child. Okay, so what is play therapy? So in play therapy, we adopt play as language. So again, the language here is play, whether it's role play, whether it's sand trays, whether it's art. The play is not specific to the object. The toys are words, I would say. So we are using toys or play, puppets, cars, and the car could become anything. The car could be a car, or the car could be a superhero, the car could be a dinosaur. There's a lot of imagination happening. So we're not focused on what the play is making. We're not focused on whether the child is drawing an angry face or a happy face. We're looking at the child's breathing. We're looking at the child's movement. We're looking at how the child has positioned themselves in the playroom next to the therapist, or are they turning their back to the therapist? Play, rather the engagement, the interpersonal play is the language. And even sometimes if the child is only playing with themselves, they are still telling us a lot. So in play therapy, we recognize that there is far, far more than just verbal play. Verbal play is in fact, or just verbal anything, is not often the big part of play therapy. Play therapy is driven towards complete self-actualization. So the idea here is, I don't know if you all are familiar with Carl Rogers, but the idea is that any human being is constantly working towards being the best version of themselves at their own capacities. So my capacity for being the best version of myself today is perhaps 70 out of 100, just to give you an example. Not that we quantify these things, but maybe tomorrow, if I'm feeling really low, or 3 years from now, if I'm depressed, if I'm anxious, my capacity to be myself could change. But the fact is that I'm trying to be myself. And we approach this with no judgment. There is no hierarchy. There is this is good and that is bad. We know that healing is non-linear. We often dip before we can rise again, and we might dip again and again. And the dips are important in order to keep rising. But rather, when it comes to, I forgot what I was saying. Yes, it also comes back to, when I say being the best version of myself in my capacity, it is also my understanding of what is the best version of myself. Today, I might think that shouting is an appropriate response and that it warrants my feelings. But 5 days from now, when I look back and I'm feeling calmer and I'm feeling more secure in myself and my environment again, I might be able to revisit that and think, okay, I can see how perhaps I should have taken a few hours to myself and then revisited the conversation with that person later instead of. So in that sense, the way we see ourselves is also something that is in constant exploration or progress. Play therapy is non-directive. By that I mean, if y'all are, again, comes back to Carl Rogers, psychology evolved from Freud, right? A lot of psychotherapy rather, and that, that came from a space of telling the client what was wrong with them and what they needed and what they wanted. But rather, when we work non-directively, we are holding space. Coming back to that quote that I mentioned earlier, we are holding space for the client to explore how they can heal themselves and what they feel they need best. And when we do this, when we work non-directively, we are giving the client, we are empowering the client to empower themselves. We are holding space, we are acknowledging everything, and we are also reflecting. So if a child says something like, let's say they're not talking, let's say they're turning their back towards me and they're playing, then I will be holding the space and I will acknowledge it and I will reflect. I can see that you want to play by yourself today. Okay, I'm just letting you know that I'm here. So we are reflecting to the child what they are telling us. We are allowing the child to take the lead, and we are reinforcing to them that they are in charge, they are in control. And the process of doing this can be very empowering. I'll elaborate on this some more on the coming slides. Play therapy is a safe process, and I want to say that this is an important point because, like I said, coming back to stigma, there's a lot of stigma around, is therapy safe for a child? Is it going to get overwhelming, etc., etc.? Is the therapist, safe? Is the client safe in a locked room with the therapist? So when I say play therapy is a safe process, it is emotionally safe in that the child is projecting their feelings onto toys for the most part, onto the play. So it creates some distance from themselves and their feelings. So they can watch their feelings on their play. And so they are not feeling overwhelmed. It's a safe process also because the therapist is there to hold it. I'm not simply watching the child's play, I am also holding it. And it's also a safe process in the sense that the child is safe because the therapist is keeping them safe. There are a few rules to make sure that the child keeps themselves safe when they're in the room. And also, there's a lot of police check that's done, background checks that are done, insurance, etc., to make sure that the therapist is also safe. By symbolically altering endings, children can develop ideas of self and an inner shift towards conflict resolution. So I'm going to go back to that example about the teacher. So you saw how the child first plays out this angry teacher and then plays out a kind teacher. So their idea of self, A, has changed. You know, they can see how they felt when they were being undermined. So their idea of themselves, you know, they're shocked. They can feel shocked and they can have a lot more empathy for themselves. And the inner shift towards conflict resolution occurs when the child starts to play the kind teacher, because they can see how the world can be different. When they play out their experiences, it gives them a chance to see how things could have been done differently. So they can see how this teacher who was mean to them could have instead been kind and benevolent and could have said, instead of how dare you not have done your homework, get out of class, instead of that, the teacher could have said, I understand that you might be having a difficult time. We can talk about what you need later after class. And so the second point, by symbolically altering endings, children can develop confidence in dealing with their environment through identification of healthy coping mechanisms. So going back to that example about shouting, when I am able to reflect on how things could have gone differently, I'm able to develop confidence within myself to say, okay, I made a mistake, but now I can see that I could have done things differently. And I now am able to identify a more healthy coping mechanism when I am feeling angry instead of shouting. Are there any questions at this point? Okay. How is play therapy different from play? So we have play work, and play work is when you're working with a young child, and you know the parents are at work or the parents are unavailable, and the child requires after-school care. So this could be a creche. Filial play therapy is typically with the child. So you have them in the room, and you as a therapist are facilitating their relationship. So you're rebuilding their relationship and you're helping them build a healthier dynamic. In child psychotherapy, we are working with children who are older. They're more possibly verbally abusive. They might be destructive. Typically, children who are really, really acting out. In play therapy, you have a child whose needs are, I would say, moderate to severe. And in therapeutic play, you have a child whose needs are mild, possibly mild to moderate. It's not to say that therapeutic play may not help a child who needs play therapy, but therapeutic play will help only to an extent. And that's because in play therapy, we're a little more directive in our exercises, in our play exercises. But in therapeutic play, we are absolutely non-directive. Okay, so whom can play therapy help? It can help children who are dealing with bereavement, whose parents might be separated or divorced, children who are underperforming academically, socially, behaviorally, culturally. They may be on the autism spectrum, children who have behavioral and communication difficulties. A lot of the time I'll meet children, or I'll meet parents who are afraid that, their child is not talking, has not yet started talking, or used to talk but has stopped talking now. And sometimes it's not necessarily a speech therapy issue. Sometimes it's because there has been a traumatic event and the child is afraid to speak. It can help children who are dealing with anger and depression, children who are stressed, who are afraid, anxious, having nightmares often, children who are withdrawn, they isolate themselves, or perhaps they are being isolated, or they leave the house or school without informing anybody, without any permission, with no supervision. Children who might have been abused, have experienced trauma, and might be bullying others or might have been bullied themselves. So the founder of play therapy is a lady named Virginia Axline. She used to be Carl Rogers' student and colleague. And what she's basically done is she has used Carl Rogers' approach that was directed towards adults. She has used the same approach and she has adapted it slightly to suit children's needs. So again, it's client-centered. I'm just going to clarify here, words like client-centered, person-centered, non-directive therapy, they're all the same thing. It essentially means that we allow the client to to bring whatever they want to the therapy room. So in many situations, the parents will tell me what they think the problems are. But when the child comes in, they are free to explore whatever they want in therapy. So for 3 sessions, the child might be exploring a fight they had with a friend. And then on the 4th session, they might be exploring something completely different. And it's not for me to decide. It's not for me to say, no, I think we need to do something else. I don't think this is important. It's never my place to say that. So the child is allowed to decide what they want to bring to therapy, and they are also allowed to decide how they would like to explore it. So whether it could be through art, it could be through movement, music, dance, santre, or even from any angle. Just they are given complete rein, I would say. They're given the reins to direct their own therapy. And also, they're also empowered to think of what they need, to introspect and over time identify what they need and how they can get it. And of course, all of this is done with the help of a therapist, with the therapist holding the space and reflecting and giving the child insight. But I am not leading the therapy, I am facilitating it. So these 2 books on the side, Dibs in Search of Self and Play Therapy, were written by her. And if you're interested in reading more about play therapy, these 2 books are a great place to start because they're literally written by the lady who founded play therapy. So this is the toolkit that we use in play therapy. On the left is the medium, and on the right are what each one promotes. So when we use art, it promotes creative and aesthetic experiences in the child, by which I mean you might have a child who's experiencing a lot of trauma, and sometimes it can be, exhausting, physically, mentally draining to constantly work on it in therapy. And therapy is not always supposed to be about, looking at what's going wrong. Positive psychology is a whole other field, and it is important. And creating positive feelings within the client is something that we obviously want to do. So in creating aesthetic experiences, and creating a painting or a drawing or something with clay perhaps, there's a lot of work that happens, especially with clay. There's a lot of finger work, and we're also connecting our bodies with earth. And it's a very powerful emotional tool, clay, that we use in play therapy. So art is sometimes just great in order to just, sometimes feel some relief, and to also just remind ourselves that we have the capacity to create beauty even if we're not experiencing it. Music promotes community. This is a bit difficult to explain verbally, but especially when we're using drums, there's a lot of empathy and communication that's happening. When we're talking about dance and movement, there's a physical expression. So like I said, when the child is turning their backs to us, when the child is facing us, the manner in which the child is taking up space. I once had this client who, she was almost like a cage. I literally saw her as a cage, and she would come in, she would sit on the floor. She was very, she would always come in very well dressed, very polite, very, just great manners. Would always maintain eye contact, would always say, please, may I, thank you, just immaculate. And she was basically holding everything within. She was holding herself. She was just holding it all together. And then finally, over a couple of sessions, she finally picked up a ping pong ball and she threw it. She stood on one end of the room and she threw the ping pong ball against the other end of the room. And my job is to also reflect not just verbally what the child is doing, but also reflect non-verbally. So I will sit in the same manner that they are sitting. I'm basically reflecting their movement, their body language. I'm almost in a sense mirroring them completely, because that also is a way of telling them, I hear you, I feel you, I see you. It's a way of very powerfully expressing empathy to the child. So this child is throwing a ping pong ball, and I think about 5 minutes go by and the entire room, the energy is completely transformed. From a child who was like a cage, she was like a bird that erupted from the cage. It was like the energy is finally free. And she's throwing the ping pong ball against the wall, and she was just finally like a child in a room who is playing and having fun. And in this child's particular case, it was a very, very pivotal moment in her therapeutic journey. When we use sand trays and toys, there's a lot of emotional development that's occurring in the sand tray. You'll see a child come in and, they'll take some toys, they'll build a story. So when a child is playing in a sand tray, they are usually building a story. And then over time, over maybe like 15 minutes or even half an hour sometimes, so sometimes it can even be just in the last 5 minutes of a session, you'll see that the scene in the sand tray has changed. The energies have changed. It's like they are building a story and then they realize how things could have gone differently, or they find a conflict resolution, or they find what they need. It's almost like if you were reading a story to a child and that last page, the last 2-3 pages of when everything has been sorted out and the fight has calmed down and we're reaching the happy ending. Sometimes. Puppets and masks, there's a lot of self-care that happens with puppets and masks, because as you can imagine, when a child is wearing a puppet, they are talking through the puppet. So they are not talking to you directly. They are talking to your puppet through their puppet. So they have someone else who is a voice for them. And that's very powerful, especially when the puppet comes off and they finally feel like, there's a strong sense of, I want to say an aha moment, but more than an aha moment, it's like realizing how they are feeling and what they need, and they've taken off the puppet and they're talking to you directly. And it's a beautiful moment to be a part of, because then once the puppet comes off, it's like they feel strong enough to ask for what they need. They don't feel like they need another voice to ask someone for what they need, to talk for them.
Whoa.
Sorry, is someone saying something? Okay. When we're using therapeutic storytelling, we're working with moral and spiritual development. This is something I could do a presentation on, a whole other presentation on it entirely. But in a therapeutic story, basically, we write a story. Usually the therapist writes a story for the client, or you can just find a story that's already been written that suits the client perfectly. But typically, the protagonist is, someone friendly, someone like an animal or something like that. And this animal is of a similar age or something to the child. And we typically build the protagonist to be, in terms of the difficulty, something similar to the child. So the child can empathize with the protagonist, and then the protagonist is going through their life and they have a struggle. And then as they are struggling, a friendly, maybe an owl comes in, and this owl is there for maybe 2-3 pages, and this owl helps the child out, helps this animal out, and then the animal goes off and understands what they need and how to ask for it. And that's the ending of sorts. And we build it in such a way that the child feels empathy for the story and can see themselves in the story, and it's something that they can draw from for themselves. We use a therapeutic story if we feel like the child is a little bit stuck, if they're stuck somewhere in their journey and they might need a little bit of input, a little bit of insight in an indirect manner. So we introduce the story then. And we introduce the story as, oh, I wrote this story for you and it's there for you if you want to read it. It's totally okay if you don't want to read it. You can decide. And once the story is over, we invite the child to draw out how they're feeling or to create a sand tray. And so it gives them a chance to express how the story felt for them. And you will see a change with the therapeutic story, but you need to give it like about 2 weeks minimum for the story to sink in. And it's a very, very good sign if a child ever asks to hear the story again and again. It's a good sign because it means that they really resonate with the story and they're processing it. Creative visualization is just mindfulness for children. But of course, to tell a child, sit down, cross your legs, close your eyes, breathe, it's not going to work. No child wants to do that. It's not fun, especially in a room full of toys. Really, that's not going to work. So with creative visualization, we do a guided exercise where, we're working on some progressive muscle relaxation. We get the child to relax their bodies, to breathe into their bodies, pick a corner in the room that they'd like to do that in, and then if they feel safe enough, close their eyes. This is, of course, definitely both therapeutic stories and creative visualization are absolutely not something that we do in the first few sessions. It's definitely something that you do in the last few sessions at least, or at least when you've known the child for at least maybe 2 months or something, and beyond that, you're sure that the child trusts you and that the two of you have a good dynamic and the child feels safe with you. Because to ask a child to close their eyes in a closed room with an adult, it can be very scary for a child. So, so we ask the child to close their eyes, and we take them down a journey, an imaginative journey to a safe place, which is all their own. And this is a way of generating mindfulness. And we tell the child, they can create it, they can imagine this place however they want. If you know the child and you know that they like forests or oceans or space or something, then you can sort of write the mindfulness script to suit that environment. So you can always change the script that you use. Say you use a garden, then you take the child to the garden, and then from there they can imagine it however they want to. They can build it however they want to, and stay there for some time. And then we tell the child, this is your space, this is your safe space, and whenever you're feeling anxious, you're feeling confused, you just want a space to go to that's all your own, this space will always be there for you, and you can take anyone whom you want to here, but you decide whom you take here. And they have the keys to this place. So this is, it calms the child down, and that's the way in which it promotes understanding and thinking, because it calms them down, especially when they're feeling anxious. So we use it sometimes if a child is feeling anxious in the middle of a class. They can have a little physical object in their pencil box or somewhere that reminds them of their special place. So they hold it and they go back to that special place in their minds and they feel safe. And it's great for children who are in situations, in abusive situations that they can't get out of, because at least they have a safe space they can go to in their minds. Drama is helpful for social relationships. Like I showed you in that teacher-child example, teacher-student example, where role playing. So there's projection that's happening, there's communication that's happening, there's gauging of dynamic, there's gauging of boundaries, where in drama we work a lot on social relationships. So this is a beautiful quote. It was said by a child in one of his sessions with the founder of Play Therapy, Virginia Axline. Oh, every child just once in his life should have a chance to spill out all over without a don't you dare, don't you dare, don't you dare. So I think, in fact, this was Axline's very first client, and he was playing with paint. And we have very few rules in the play therapy room. The rules are kept very minimal just to make sure that all the toys are safe, the client is safe, and the therapist is safe. So this child came into the room and he said, every child should have a chance at least once in his life to just throw paint. He was talking about paint, but we can just even talk about, just throwing all my trucks on the floor and all my toys and just making a mess. Because believe it or not, making a mess can be very, very therapeutic. Okay, so are there any questions at this point? Okay. So these are Axline's 8 principles. The first one is that the therapist, oh my God, what am I saying? The first rule is that the therapist must develop a warm and friendly relationship with the client. Obviously, right? Because you want the child to feel secure with you. You want the child to feel safe in the room with you. And it's going to be a closed room. And you're a stranger that the child is meeting. And for the very first time, it can be very overwhelming. It can be scary. So the second rule is that the therapist accepts the client as he or she is. And this is important because you can have a client whose values or whose behaviors can shock you, can completely disagree with your values. But when you go into the room, you are like, if I go into a play therapy room, I am, say, Jack's therapist. And Jack's therapist accepts him 100%. It doesn't mean that I condone Jack's actions. It doesn't mean that I justify Jack's actions. It just means that I accept Jack completely, whether he is a monster, whether he is an angel, whether he is anyone, I accept him completely. Whatever he does, I am there. I am consistent. I still show up. I don't abandon him, or I don't neglect him. I don't judge him. And I also don't praise him. Establish a feeling of permissiveness in the relationship so that the client feels free to express their feelings completely. So in my play therapy room, if a child wants to swear, if a child wants to curse, if a child wants to scream and cry or dance and throw a party in the room, maybe take all the stuffed toys and throw a tea party, everything is completely accepted and welcome. So you want, obviously in any therapy, right, you want your client to be able to come to you and tell you completely how they feel. You want them to be able to come to you and pour all their feelings out. And in order for that to happen, the client needs to feel that space exists. And the way in which we create that space is by accepting the child, by sharing a warm and friendly relationship with them, and also slowly over time helping them understand that they have their own, they can take the space. We want children to be able to take up space, to claim space, so to claim the play therapy room space as their space where they can express whatever they want to. The fourth principle is to be alert, to recognize the feelings the client is expressing and to reflect these feelings back in such a manner that the client gains insight into their behavior. So like I said with that example of the child who turned his back to me, and I expressed to him, I recognized his feelings that he wanted to be alone. And I reflected and I expressed his feelings back to him. I said, I can see that you would like to play alone. And I'm just letting you know that I'm here. So we're reflecting the client's feelings back in such a manner that they gain insight, just telling them, just reminding them that I see it and that this is what they're doing and I accept it and I'm here. So I don't overtly say that's okay. I don't tell them what's okay and what's not. I just reflect it and I maintain consistency. I continue to look at the child, I continue to hold the space, and I accept it completely. Maintain a deep respect in the client's ability to solve their problems and give the client the opportunity to do so. So again, when a client comes into the room, it's completely their prerogative what they want to address that day in therapy. And they have the ability to solve their problems. And I also recognize that they have what it takes to solve their problems. And I give them that space and I give them the reins over it. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't. I don't want to be sitting there telling the child what to do. I don't want to take control of their lives, because if I do that, they're not going to learn the techniques needed in order to create healthy changes in their lives. So at the end of the day, I help them understand that their responsibility for their choices and to make change in their lives is their own. Do not attempt to direct the client's actions or conversations in any manner. The client leads the way and the therapist follows. So again, this goes back to the previous point. The child leads the way. So the child plays with whatever they want to. They say whatever they want to. I am not here to say no, but I think we should talk about your relationship with your mom instead of talking about your friend who has that new toy. I don't tell them what's important. I don't direct their therapy. I trust that the client knows how to heal themselves, and that being consistent and predictable is what they need the most. And do not hurry the therapy along. It is a gradual process and must be recognized as such by the therapist. This is really important. It's very easy to get caught up in a client's journey, in the therapeutic journey. It can, sometimes you might be able to see what the child needs before they've seen it, and you might start to get impatient or frustrated. You might start to wonder why they're stuck and what you can do, etc., etc. And then what happens is you start to spill some of yourself and your needs and your wants onto the client. But in that room, we are there the only focus is the client's needs and the client's wants. And if a client needs 10 sessions to figure out what they need and how to ask for it, we give it to them. Even if I know what they need or want before they do. My job is not to jump in. My job is not to rescue them. My job is to help them figure it out, to help them take the time. And it's very important for us also to acknowledge that we need to give not just children, but anyone the time that they need to figure it out. Only establish those limitations necessary to anchor the therapeutic process to the world of reality and to make the client aware of his or her responsibility in the relationship. So like I said, we have very minimal rules in the play therapy room. When a client comes in, I tell them that everything that they do, so I tell them that the play therapy room is their space and that they can say whatever they want, that I won't tell anyone. And the only time I will ever tell anyone anything that they say or do is only if they tell me that someone has hurt them or that they are hurting someone. And I do this not because I want to punish them, but I do this because I want to keep them safe. And then I tell them that before I tell their parents that they are hurt or that they are hurting someone, I will tell them first. And then I will tell them that I'm going to have to tell your parents because I made a promise to you that I have to keep you safe, and I will be telling your parents. So a few of the other rules are also that we promise to keep each other safe in the play therapy room, and we promise to keep everything in the room safe. And that can kind of sound like a weird rule, keep toys safe. What does that mean? But essentially, it's saying don't break the toys, so that they're here for you to use when you come back, and any other child who uses the room can also use these toys. So this is with regards to the principles that I just read out. The process of non-directive therapy is so interwoven that it is difficult to tell where one principle begins and another ends. They are overlapping and interdependent. For example, the therapist cannot be accepting without being permissive. She cannot be permissive without being accepting. She cannot leave the responsibility to make choices of the child that she does not respect. The degree to which the therapist is able to put these principles into practice seems to affect the depth to which the therapy can go. This is 100% absolutely true. If a therapist is disrespectful or does not accept the child or is being judgmental, honestly, the therapy can only go so far. The therapy goes deeper with the therapist if the therapist is able to hold the space really, really well. And in order to hold space, it means you are being accepting, completely non-judgmental and permissive, and you have absolute respect for the child's being as a human being. There's just no judgment. Birds fly, fish swim, and children play. Gary Landreth. It's just what children do, they play. It's just their nature. Okay, so here I want to talk about why play therapy is needed, and more than that, how important mental health is to a child in terms of their brain. Like, I'm boiling it very down to the brain. We're going to talk about how experiences, especially external experiences, influence a child's brain from the moment they are an infant, and how these experiences transform the child's personality, behavior, emotions, relationships, even their expression, even their physical development. That is how important external experiences are. So play is known as the brain sculptor because it helps interweave neural pathways between the top and the bottom of the brain. So otherwise, the child naturally develops neural pathways from the left to the right lobes, but play helps them develop neural pathways from the top and the bottom parts of their brain. I think that's amazing. It's so powerful. It's literally building the brain. Feeling understood and connected to an adult is important in regulating a child's developing brain, particularly in quieting an aroused limbic system. Okay, so we know that in order to calm a child, we have to be calm ourselves, right? We can't pour from an empty cup. So if my cup is full, I'm able to pour some out to you. But if I'm feeling aroused and anxious and panicked, I'm not in a space to calm the child down. So to calm a child down is important. A child needs at least 100 instances of being soothed before they can learn to self-soothe. And that in order to, self-soothe, that means that they have had someone who has been there for them, or a couple of times, a couple of different people maybe, but preferably at least this one person who is consistent, who is always there to calm them down. And when I'm talking about an aroused limbic system, I'm talking about the brain, a part of the brain. And when that gets anxious or I'll go into that later, but essentially I'm talking about being able to be calm in order to calm a child. And the child needs to feel connected, safe, and secure. There needs to be a lot of trust. And only when there is that trust is the child able to calm themselves down. Brain research shows that parents, child professionals, and other significant individuals in the child's life lead to a long-term change in release of brain chemicals and anatomical structures. I think this is crazy. It's wild. The fact that our relationships have such a significant impact on our brain in terms of the brain chemicals. If there's abuse at home or if a teacher is scary, we're releasing stress chemicals, right? There's cortisol, and what happens if there's too much cortisol in a brain? It's affecting the brain negatively, and when a child especially experiences a lot of cortisol, it affects the development of the brain, and then a child may not be able to perform cognitively. Some of their functions might be delayed or hampered. So And we also know that, if someone has been severely depressed for a long time, then their brain shrinks. So that is just how important our relationships are on our mental health and just our brain and developing our brain, the structure of our brain. If a child experiences healthy, positive relationships and there's opioids and oxytocin and a lot of other happy chemicals like dopamine, the brain is going to flourish and thrive and you're going to have optimum brain development. And there's nothing better than a healthy, consistent, predictable, safe, secure, nurturing relationship with at least one adult in their life who's always there, one present adult. The act of play in itself is regulating. It releases anti-anxiety chemicals in the brain. So play leads to the release of your happy brain chemicals like opioids and oxytocin. It helps make the child feel less aggressive or anxious. It helps a child feel safe. It helps them feel calm and psychologically stronger. And it also prepares the child for learning, because if a child is feeling anxious or stressed or afraid, they're not able to access learning. They're not able to access the material in front of them. Because what happens when you're feeling stress, you're not able to access the learning part of your brain. All that's happening is your brain is stressed. So we want happy kids in classes. Okay, brain development. So the brain has three basic parts that develop in order, one after the other. So we have the brain stem, then which is the bottom. Okay, it's kind of behind your neck, and it grows upwards. That's your brain stem. Then you have your limbic system that's on top of that, and then you have your cortex. So they grow in that order, but even though they grow one after the other, they operate together. And this is just, the next few slides are going to explain why physical health and mental health are both equally important. So your brainstem develops when you're a fetus, and it matures during your first year of life. So your brainstem is responsible for your breathing, your heart rate, your blood pressure, body temperature, your sleep, and your ability to perceive threat. So it's organized by predictable and sensory experiences during your first year of life. Predictable experiences, I mean that if a baby cries, then they know that someone is going to come and take care of them. There is going to be someone who's going to come and nurture them. That's a positive, predictable experience. If there's a negative, predictable experience where the baby cries and more often than not, someone is not there, or so someone's there sometimes and someone's not there sometimes, then there's a dysregulation, and it affects the child's, their breathing, their heart rate, their sensory integration problems, their appetite, their lack of attention. This happens if there's abuse as well, if there are traumatic experiences in that first year of life, if there's neglect. So I think adopted children have it's so sad, the poor head start, or the lack of a head start that they have in life. Changes beyond the first year of life requires significant repeated experiences. So, I think the easiest example here is when you rescue a dog or a puppy who has had a traumatic experience. Maybe they've been run over, maybe someone was really cruel to them. It's likely that the dog is going to be withdrawn, or is going to be really angry and is going to be barking. But they're coming from a space where there was a lot of trauma. So in order to change that, you'll see a lot of owners will say, yeah, he was acting out. He was really an angry puppy in his first year of life, but we've taken care of him. We've been consistent. We've been nurturing. We've been there for him. We've accepted him. And we've done that repeatedly. And now the puppy has changed. Now the puppy is a happy puppy. And it's the same thing with babies. It's the same thing. So the most important antidote to anything for a baby is significant repeated experiences, predictability, and consistency. When I say rhythmic, repetitive somatosensory experiences, I mean, rocking a baby helps a lot because there's a rhythm and it's repetitive. When I say somatosensory, I also mean helping the baby engage with different senses, so by singing to them, by rocking them, by playing with, um, with different smells around them, we're helping them develop by using their different senses and to also help calm a dysregulated brainstem. Okay, so the limbic system matures during childhood, so the baby is older. This involves emotional reactions. So whether a child shouts or speaks, attachment, whether a child has a secure attachment with a parent or is avoidant in their relationship with their parent, their relational connections in the sense of how they relate to others, their social relationships, their friends, their teachers, their motivation, their drive to learn, their attention, their eagerness or lack of in going to school, and the integration of memory, how they're able to recall early experiences or even something that they've learned in class. So here is the amygdala, and the amygdala is what is responsible for your fight or flight. I don't know if you all are familiar with the fight or flight response. Basically, this is your core of emotional function. By that, I mean your amygdala assesses and responds to threat. So it's picking up on, this is your survival mode. Your amygdala is what goes on survival mode. It's what's there to keep you alive. It's what tells you if there's a tiger approaching, if someone's about to slap you, if a situation is unsafe. It's like the siren in your brain. And when this amygdala is activated, it can cause intense emotion. So there can be a child who shouts or a child who's afraid. When there's a child who shouts, we call it fight, and we call it the fight or flight mode. We call it fight mode. And if there's a child who's afraid, we call it flight mode. So typically you'll see a child either fight in terms of shouting back or getting aggressive, or a child who runs away from a situation, wants to evade it, is just quiet maybe. And then you also have something that's called freeze mode. So where a child doesn't run away, doesn't fight back, is just still, just stands still, doesn't say anything, doesn't do anything, it just wants to disappear. And this child has just frozen out of fear. Your limbic system develops based on your interaction with your external environment. So going back to the previous slide, if you've had positive and safe experiences, you will understand that the world is a safe space. You will come into the world trusting the world because your primary template, the very first experience of a relationship that you have ever had, was positive, and that becomes your base. So if you've had a positive first experience, you will go into the rest of the world and you will trust the world. And in terms of your future interactions. And if you've had a negative early experience where you were frightened and your environment was unpredictable and it was inconsistent, then you will go in making associations. So if there's a loud sound, you might jump, or you might feel that, children who grow up in war-torn zones, if there's a loud sound, even years later, it triggers them. They go back into a flashback. Their bodies are activated. There's cortisol flooding their brains because it's literally post-traumatic stress disorder on a neurological level. The brain is telling them that there might be a threat. They've made an association, a sound, they've heard a loud sound, and they associate it to a bomb. Versus, if you've maybe in a more regular environment like ours, if you've woken up every morning listening to a parent shouting, then every time, maybe later when you wake up in the morning and you hear someone shouting, or you in general hear someone shouting, maybe your stomach will clench and your body is tense because your amygdala has been triggered. So the only way to, like I said before, to heal emotional dysregulation due to attachment difficulties, due to a lack of predictable and consistent relationships in the beginning, in the first year of life, is by just making sure that we can replace that, or not replace, but we can ensure nurturing, repetitive, consistent, safe, positive interactions with others in order to cause positive change. So basically showing the child that maybe your first primary relationship was an unhappy one, but the rest of your relationships can be happy. And by really demonstrating that, by not just saying it, but by also showing it. The cortex. So this is the final part of your brain that fully develops during early adulthood. It fully develops by 25 years of age. It's responsible for your reasoning skills, your thinking skills, your cognitive skills, your ability to problem solve. Children with lesser cortex development display difficulty with impulsivity, judgment, and academic performance. So a lot of the times you'll see children who, have gone through a lot of trauma, or had a really, really difficult life. And, a lot of adults will say, wow, this child is just, wise beyond their years, etc., etc. And what's happening in that child's brain is they are coping with the difficult immediate environment that they are in. But in coping with a really stressed out traumatic environment, they are being forced to accelerate brain development. And while it might sound like an accelerated brain development is great because you're having, you're working on your brain more, you're developing it more at an earlier stage, it's not, because an accelerated brain development just does not allow, like your limbic system that develops during childhood to mature fully. There is a reason why your limbic system is developing during your childhood. You need that time to fully develop all the skills that your brain is capable of during that time. So this is why children who, once they become young adults, they're not able to access their cortex, which is, the front part of your brain, sort of behind your forehead. And, they're not able to control their emotions. They're not able to gauge a situation correctly. They're not able to gauge whether it's a safe or unsafe situation. They may lash out at their loved ones, and they're not able to perform academically. They don't have the ability needed to display and motivation to learn, and even in, like we talked about, memory integration, because they're just not able to access their cortex. Children are dependent upon the development of the brainstem and the limbic system. The cortex is dependent upon the development of the brainstem and the limbic system. So again, if your brainstem and your limbic systems haven't developed completely, then your cortex is also not able to develop completely. It's like your brain it's stuck almost in development. It's the cortex is the easiest part of the brain to heal. It can be accessed consciously and changed via verbal input. So that is your CBT, your cognitive behavioral therapy, and your rational emotive behavioral therapy. That is like a band-aid for you. And that's why it's the easiest to modify, because you can just use logic and rational thinking to work with just the top part of your brain. But like we know, the trauma occurs earlier, and the trauma is happening at the bottom parts of your brain. So in order to access the trauma that's happened to the bottom parts of the brain, that's the brainstem and the limbic system, we need more creative therapies that go deeper, that are more appropriately equipped in dealing with the subconscious and the unconscious, so that we can go deeper and actually cause healing. Like we know, the calming of the limbic system is what we need for optimal brain development. And it's what we need to create neural pathways that lead a healthy attachment. So all hope is not lost. If in case there has been neglect and abuse, and we're not able to, catch a child, and we're working with the adult instead of working with the child when they were younger, all hope is not lost. We can still create neural pathways. We can still foster neural pathways that comprehend safe touch, safe environments, safe relationships, what it means to feel secure. It is still possible. It might be slower, it might be more difficult, but it is still possible. So essentially, the development of a brain is significantly influenced by interactions between the parent and child. The interactions between a parent and child is what is the base of their emotional regulation. If a child and parent are very attuned to one another, and when I say attuned, I mean they are hearing each other, they genuinely understand each other. There's deep understanding in terms of hearing each other, seeing each other, their actions, and knowing where the other is coming from, experiencing security and trust. Then you have your positive, healthy attachment and your positively developed brain. Okay, so this is the last slide. It's a poem. It's called As I Walk into the Playroom and is written by Tammy Van Hollander. I walk into my playroom and what do I see? I see toys and puppets calling to me. I walk in the playroom and how do I feel? I feel so at peace with the power to heal. I sit with a child so open and clear. I have no agenda but quiet their fear. We may play a game where I always lose. I feel like the winner for the child does choose. The sand is so soft as we bury each hand. I wait for their journey to a faraway land. There's dragons and villains and so much to fear. They conquer their demons without shedding a tear. Imagination goes deeper and the healing begins. Through humming and stories, I reveal a slight grin. As I know what I've witnessed and I'm part of their play, their work in the playroom gives them something to say. Their language is play and toy is a word. Yes, dear child, I promise, you're heard. Magic and wonder, the world of play. I am so blessed. What more can I say? So that poem is an introduction, I should say, into what it's like to work with a child in a play therapy room. It's a wonderful, wonderful experience. Are there any questions?
Yes. So participants will open for the question and answer session. So if any of you want to ask question, please feel free.
Yes. Good afternoon, ma'am. This is Lingeshwari. I have a question for you. Can you share any case where you have worked with ADHD or any similar type of special needs in particular?
I can't say I've worked with, so I've worked a little bit with special needs. So I don't have training in special needs or anything clinical for that matter. My work is, even when it comes to working with special needs or ADHD or anything like that, the focus of the work is their emotional state. And once we calm the emotional state, we also see the symptoms of the diagnosis going down a lot. So when I was working with a special needs child, I couldn't work with him for long because of coronavirus. But it was, for me, it was incredible watching the change happening. It was much harder, and his communication was very different. But that was the experience for me. I mean, we couldn't work long, and I'm trying to recollect now. I think basically this child had been told so much, you are a special needs child or a special needs child or a special needs child. But then when he came into the playroom, he was just a child who was playing and who had someone's undivided attention for 40 full minutes, who was also playing with him and who was just watching him with no other agenda. So I just sort of, I think what I saw was at the end of the sessions, you know, a special needs child becoming a child, just dropping the tag of special needs and just being able to play.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks, Lingeshwari.
Yes, anyone else? Yeah. So I have a question. So
Right. Yeah.
yeah. Um, so basically, what do you think, according to you, is the barrier with respect to the clients that come for play therapy?
What is the barrier I see in between me and the client, or
Um,
in getting
when the
clients?
when the parents come for the play therapy, is there a barrier?
So it depends a lot on. Yeah, I would say sometimes the barrier is mostly the parents, usually is what I've noticed. I work primarily with parents. There are a lot of parents that are very understanding and sensitive, but I do meet parents who are caught up in their marital difficulties and how that affects the child. Sometimes parents who have mental health difficulties and aren't taking care of themselves. Sometimes it's also a financial difficulty, financial constraints. Um, and sometimes it's also just really, you know, you can try with a parent. You can try talking to them about what the child needs, when they're benefiting and things like that. But a lot of the time, look, I only work with the child once a week, right? The child goes back home. So a lot of my work is also empowering the parent. And sometimes, if I have a good enough relationship with a parent, I can recommend that they take some time to take care of themselves. But I do meet parents who are not ready to look at themselves and who want to believe that the child is the problem and it's only the child.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Hi, Anil.
Hi,
So I
ma'am.
want to know, is there any role parents are playing in play therapy?
Not in the room. The parent comes in, they see the room, of course, because they want to know where the child is going to be. So the role that they play is just basically bringing their child to therapy, helping their child be regular, because we know that being regular to therapy is very, very important. You know, making sure that they're on time, helping the child regulate themselves. I do sit down with the parent before we start therapy, and we list out the parents' hopes and expectations from play therapy. And around the 8th or ninth session, I sit down with the parent and we talk about the progress that we've seen, the changes we've seen. And then we take a look at the hopes and expectations that we set. And we talk about whether, you know, we want to close therapy, depending on whether we've fulfilled our hopes and expectations. Sometimes there are new needs that have come up because the situation may have changed, so there may be new needs. In that case, we talk about whether we need to extend therapy or not. So the parent is still a caregiver during play therapy, but not a participant in play therapy. So I might give the parent input here and there.
Thank you.
Yes,
Good
Sharika.
afternoon, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, can I ask a question?
Yes, please do.
Ma'am, so in play therapy, do we use toys? And if we use toys, we've learned about how there are culturally different toys in different cultures. So does that become an important factor in selection of toys, and how does that work, ma'am?
So what we know in play therapy is that the most important toy and tool in your play therapy room is you. The therapist is the most important rule in the play therapy room, regardless of the toys that you have. You may have 100 toys, you may have 10 toys, and those 10 toys can become anything. I mean, I've seen children turn a spoon into a tree and, things like that. When it comes to, we do use toys, of course, use lots of toys. When it comes to culturally selecting your toys, it helps. It helps to have a tabla instead of the drums. But again, it also depends on, I mean, in India, you have multiple demographics. So it also depends on that specific, the environment that you're working with. I would say picking culturally appropriate toys is a bonus, but I don't think it's really important. Because even if a child doesn't know how to play with something, then that gets them to use their imagination. I've seen a child pick up a toy in my room and not know what it is, and they turn it into something else. And it's like I had a child who I had a Wonder Woman cape or a Supergirl cape, and instead of wearing it as a cape, she wore it as a bib. She put it in the front. She wore it as a bib, and then it turned into an apron. So it's always the child's imagination, and it's quite beautiful to watch.
Thank you, ma'am.
Most welcome.
Anya, I had a question. Thank you for that wonderful session, sir. And I just wanted to discuss one case with you. Recently, I just came across one child, who is in UKG. Actually, this child, the video you showed in the beginning of the program, just like that, even for the PTA meets or whatever, we interact or get to meet other children and their parents. The child comes in just like the boy who came in the beginning of the session in the video, like well dressed and with the suit and all, and he doesn't have any naughtiness that we usually see in children of that age, especially UKG kids, 5 years, 6 year kids. He's so well disciplined, well mannered. He comes and whatever the teacher asks, he answers all of that, inch by inch, as you say, in a proper sequence. Okay, so do you think, but when we, start noticing or observing the child, we don't, kind of get to see a lot of emotions on the child's face. It looks like the child is not enjoying, but he's very intelligent. I don't know whether I should be saying that, but you see, whatever the teacher asks, he's doing that, and everything in an orderly manner, in a sequence, way. So, do you think the child has some issues? Maybe he's stressed, or there's little more, than what we are able to see in the child?
That's interesting. When a child is acting out, we think that there's something wrong with the child. And when a child is behaving beautifully, we think that there's something wrong with the child. That's so sad. How can a child ever win? Not necessarily at all. I mean, something with depression, as an example, is you can see someone who's at the top of their game. And you might think that person has won everything in life, and they seem so happy. They seem like they have a rich life emotionally with friends, family, but they can be depressed. You can meet an addict, and the addict might be depressed. So I don't think we can gauge only by behavior. Behavior is communication. But if a child is behaving beautifully and if you're concerned, then you can always check with the family, about how the child is at home. And yeah, and just watch how the child is with his peers, if he has friends, if he's able to get along with children.
Okay, but my only concern is, see, when children of his age at least have some sort of naughtiness. For example, now the online classes are going on. If you just give them, the teacher asks for certain things, like, to teach certain things, maybe a ball or a toy or something. The child immediately starts exploring with the toy, or start playing or do something. But how can this child sit with the toy, like an adult, without doing anything? And listen to whatever the teacher says. And I'm sure you have worked with the kids, so you will definitely know. You know, if you have to make the child sit in front of the camera, I think 10 times for 10 or 15 minutes, 10 times we have to go and get our kids, right? Because they can't sit for a long time. They will get easily distracted, right? So I don't know how this child is able to sit for that long and not do anything with the toy and quietly hold and sit. Uh, that's what was my curiosity. So I just thought I'll ask.
It could also be, how the parent has equipped the child. Maybe the parent has helped the child practice, has gotten them ready. Do have to prepare a child for what is coming and what they can do. And maybe this child just has a very secure, healthy relationship and attachment with their parent, and that enables them to be able to sit. Especially if a child is sitting with a toy. A toy, if it's a favorite toy, can be like a security blanket.
Okay.
We call it something. We call it object permanence, I think, or something else. I can't recall what we call it, but it's if a child has a favorite toy and it's like a security blanket, it helps them stay focused. It helps them feel safe. It keeps them in the moment. So maybe this child is actually just calm.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Most welcome.
Yes, any more questions from the participants?
Anya, can I ask one more question to you?
Yes, please, ma'am.
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to know, I was just curious, what made you to choose this profession? How did you land up here?
Like I said, growing up, I just saw, I think everybody has their own strengths or difficulties, or just something that you're more inclined towards. I think I was just always a bit emotional and empathetic, and I just saw so many instances where I thought that things could have been done differently with children, with teachers, with adults. And I do still believe that children see more clearly because they don't have all the filters that we have as adults. We're not looking at it in the way that looking at situations of people in the way we've learned to or we've been told to. And I just wanted to make a difference, I guess.
Okay, that's nice to know.
Thank you. If anybody has any more questions, you can always email me or you can reach out to me on Instagram.
Yes, I think Emily, do you have a question?
Ma'am, good afternoon, ma'am. I would like to know, are the sessions usually recorded for further reference? Do you record the sessions?
I don't record sessions due to privacy and confidentiality reasons. Absolutely not. What I do in terms of record a session is I make my notes. So I will write down what I believe is important for me to reflect on and remember and keep. And of course, it's all kept completely confidential, but I don't have any other record of any session except for my notes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Most welcome.
Yes, Parul, I think you can go ahead.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I wanted to ask how your session looks like during COVID when you're doing it online, and how is the session different? Is it impacting you and the quality of the session?
Yeah, I tried it a few times and it was just not as effective at all. And unfortunately, because it's not as effective, it's basically slower. So it leads to more sessions. And even though I had cut my fee because it was online and also because it's COVID and it's difficult times for everyone, it becomes so expensive because you need more sessions. So, and what happens when you're working online is even if I, invite a child to bring in a certain, certain set of toys and whatever toys they want to bring. And even if I come into the session with my toy, tell them that I will play with the toy however they want me to. It's just not the same thing, because you're sort of still telling the child what to do, and it's no longer non-directive, and it doesn't allow me to really hold space for the child enough, because where the focus of play therapy is play, and I'm not able to play with the child. I'm not able to observe their play. I'm not able to engage with their play. And it limits us a lot, and I just wasn't enjoying it, so I stopped online play therapy. I know that there are play therapists who do teleplay therapy, and they say that it does work. I don't know. Maybe if I was trained to do teleplay therapy, I think there are some online courses on it now.
That's sad, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah, most welcome.
Yes, anyone else? Okay. So I'm assuming there are no more questions. So thank you. Yeah.
Participants, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I think the speaker will be very happy to answer. Okay, in case if you don't want to ask now, you can just write it in the chat box. We'll pass on the questions to the speaker. Thank you. Shreya, you can proceed, I think.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I think thank you, ma'am, so much for answering all our questions. I would like to invite Nivedita, ma'am, to propose the vote of thanks. Ma'am, I think you have to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. So thank you, Shreya. Good afternoon, one and all. It gives me an immense pleasure to deliver a word of thanks for the event. Firstly, I would like to thank Ms. Anya Reddy, a play therapist, for enriching us with the importance of play as a therapy. So it was nice to know how play therapy is different from play and how it positively influences the child personality. Thank you. I would like to extend my gratitude to our principal, Dr. Sister Arpana, for providing this opportunity to conduct the webinar. I would also like to thank our beloved HOD, Dr. Sujata Gupta Kedar, for the constant support and encouragement to take up such initiatives. Thank you, ma'am. I also thank my colleagues, Dr. Savita, Ms. Lingeshwari, and Ms. Shreya for successfully coordinating the program. Last but not least, I thank all the participants for taking active participation throughout the session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for having me, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you to everyone for attending and participating. I had fun.
Thank you so much.